Nobody's talking about this. While every news channel on the planet was busy covering the chaos in the Middle East, Ukraine quietly executed one of the most calculated military dismantling operations the modern world has ever seen, and Russia didn't even see it coming. By the time the Kremlin realized what was happening, it was already too late. Stay with me, because what Ukraine pulled off in just 28 days will genuinely shock you. Let's set the scene here, because context is everything.
The year is 2026, and the Russia-Ukraine war has been grinding on for over 4 years now. Most people, understandably, have started tuning out. The headlines have become repetitive. There's always a new city being shelled, always a new offensive being announced, always the same cycle of destruction and response. It starts to blur together after a while. But here's the thing. Underneath all that noise, something real is happening, something that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Ukraine isn't just surviving anymore. It's dismantling Russia's ability to fight.
Piece by piece, system by system. And the results of that dismantling are starting to show in ways that are genuinely impossible to ignore. February and March of 2026 gave us a front row seat to what that looks like in practice. So buckle in, because we're going to go through it, all of it. And by the end of this, you're going to have a very different picture of where this war is actually heading. Let's start with the headline number, because it deserves its own moment. In February 2026, Ukraine's commander-in-chief, General Oleksandr Syrsky, announced that Ukrainian forces had struck over 105,200 Russian targets in a single calendar month, 28 days. That breaks down to approximately 3,750 targets per day. Now, before you dismiss that as wartime propaganda or inflated statistics, consider what it actually tells us about the nature of this conflict right now. That number isn't primarily made up of tanks and aircraft. The bulk of those targets were drones, drone positions, supply depots, troop concentrations, command posts, communications equipment, and logistical nodes. In other words, the day-to-day machinery that keeps a modern army functioning.
And what it tells you is this. Ukraine has built a drone-centric military operation that runs around the clock every single day with almost mechanical precision. This isn't the Ukraine of 2022, scrambling to improvise a defense with whatever it could get its hands on. This is a Ukraine that has industrialized the art of targeting. But the raw number isn't even the most interesting part of the February data. The type of targeting that Ukraine prioritized, that's where things get genuinely fascinating. Here's the strategic reality of Russia's drone war, and it's important to understand this before we go further. Russia at this point is producing somewhere in the neighborhood of 19,000 FPV drones per day. That's a staggering number. For reference, back in 2025, Russia was believed to be manufacturing around 2 million FPV drones annually, which worked out to roughly 5,500 per day. If the February 2026 figures are accurate, Russia has more than tripled its daily drone output in less than a year. On the surface, that sounds catastrophic for Ukraine. And it would be if Ukraine was trying to shoot down every single drone that Russia throws at it. But Ukraine, at some point in early 2026, made a very deliberate decision. They stopped trying to win the numbers game on individual drones. They went after something far more valuable, the drone pilots. Think about it for a second. It doesn't matter how many drones you build if there's nobody trained and ready to fly them. An FPV drone sitting on a shelf waiting for a pilot is just a piece of plastic and circuitry. It does absolutely nothing. The moment you start eliminating the pilots, the people sitting behind the controllers, guiding those drones into Ukrainian positions, you're not just taking one drone out of the fight. You're potentially taking hundreds of them offline simultaneously. In February 2026, Ukraine destroyed over 4,000 Russian drone pilot positions. 4,000 in 1 month.
Now, Russia wasn't blind to this vulnerability. Syrsky himself noted that the Kremlin was making aggressive plans to grow its unmanned systems force to 101,000 personnel by April 1st. That tells you everything about how seriously Russia is taking the drone war. They were treating it like a full branch of the military, training that many operators takes time, resources, and infrastructure. And Ukraine just spent an entire month sending a very clear message to those operators. You are not safe. We know where you are, and we can reach you. The psychological impact of that alone is significant. When drone pilots start getting hit well behind the front lines in positions they thought were secure, it changes the equation completely. Operators become hesitant, reaction times slow down, the confidence that makes a good drone pilot effective starts to erode. Russia's drone strategy isn't just about FPV units on the front line. There's a bigger uglier picture here involving long-range Shahed-type attack drones, the ones that Russia has been launching into Ukrainian cities, power plants, and military facilities for years now. By September 2025, Russia was producing roughly 30,000 Shahed-type drones per year and had plans to double that. By early 2026, Russia's stated ambition was to reach a launch rate of 1,000 attack drones per day into Ukraine's territory. Think about that for a moment. 1,000 drones every single day, raining down on civilian infrastructure and military targets. That's a level of aerial bombardment that very few nations in history have ever had to absorb. Russia hasn't quite hit that daily target yet, and the war in the Middle East has complicated things significantly, particularly when it comes to Iran, which has been a key supplier of the components Russia needs to build its domestic Shahed-type drone variants. When Iran took serious damage, that supply chain got a lot more uncertain.
But Russia was still launching at scale. February 2026 saw 5,059 long-range drone launches from Russia, a 13% increase over January. That's a significant ramp up. And when you add in the missile launches, which we'll get to in a moment, February became one of the most intense months of aerial bombardment that Ukraine has faced since the war began. Ukraine's response? Same principle. Don't just try to shoot everything down, attack the source, which brings us to March and some of the most significant strikes of the entire year so far. In the first 12 days of March 2026, Ukraine destroyed 19 elements of Russia's air defense network. That was confirmed by the head of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, Robert Brovdy, on March 12th. Now, 19 might not sound like a huge number in isolation, but when you understand what Ukraine is trying to accomplish, it starts to look a lot more significant. Ukraine's deep strike campaign, the ability to hit targets inside Russia and in deep occupied territories, has always had one fundamental limitation: Russia's air defense network. According to reporting by Euromaidan Press, Russia was intercepting approximately 90% of Ukraine's long-range drones and missiles back in December 2025. That's a high intercept rate, no question. But it also means that 10% of everything Ukraine sends deep gets through. Ukraine's math is simple: destroy more air defense systems, open more corridors, get more weapons to more targets. Every Tor surface-to-air missile system that goes up in smoke is one less threat to Ukraine's strike drones. Every S-300 battery that gets taken out is a hole in Russia's protective umbrella. The Tor system destroyed in early March was located near Berdyansk in the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, a NATO-designated system that Russia regularly relies on to protect its troop formations and equipment concentrations. Cost to build? Somewhere between $25 and $27 million per unit. Cost of Ukraine taking it out? Comparatively, a fraction of that. That's a wildly asymmetric exchange, and it's one Ukraine is winning over and over again. The S-300 battery was hit near Borovenki in occupied Luhansk. The S-300 has been a recurring target for Ukraine throughout the war, and for good reason. It's a mobile, flexible system that Russia repositions frequently to cover gaps, protect key installations, and shield its troop movements. Every one that burns means Russia has one fewer option when it tries to protect something important. And here's what makes this even more brutal for Russia.
Sanctions. Ukraine isn't just destroying these systems faster than Russia can replace them in the field. Russia is struggling to build replacements in the first place. Key components, semiconductors, precision electronics, guidance systems are all subject to international sanctions. The supply chains are fractured, production timelines have stretched out dramatically. The Kiev Post has reported that Russia may be just one well-aimed strike or one well-timed sanction package away from being completely unable to build any more S-400 systems, its most advanced air defense platform. If that moment arrives, and based on trajectory it appears to be approaching, Russia's air defense network stops being something it can rebuild and starts being something it can only watch deteriorate. Let's talk about fuel, because fuel is the lifeblood of a mechanized military. No fuel means no tanks move. No lubricants means equipment breaks down faster than it can be repaired. An army that runs out of fuel doesn't just slow down, it stops. On March 12th, Ukrainian drones destroyed a fuel and lubricants train in the Dovzhansk sector of the Luhansk region. But this wasn't just a one-day story. That same day, Ukraine also destroyed an ammunition warehouse in occupied Luhansk, taking out thousands of artillery shells in a single strike, and took out a repair unit belonging to a Russian artillery brigade in Yakimivka, Zaporizhzhia. That's 3 separate high-value logistical strikes in a single 24-hour window, and each one has a cascading effect. When the fuel train burns, armored vehicles can't refuel. When the ammo warehouse goes up, artillery units have to wait for resupply before they can operate at full capacity. When the repair unit is destroyed, damaged artillery pieces sit idle rather than getting fixed and returned to service. Here's why this matters on a strategic level. Somewhere around 90% of all Russian military freight moves by rail. The railways aren't just how Russia ships commercial goods, they're the primary artery through which ammunition, fuel, spare parts, and equipment reach the front lines. Ukraine has understood this for a long time, and the rail strikes are a deliberate attempt to create bottlenecks at the points where Russia is most vulnerable.
Russia, of course, has been trying the same thing against Ukraine's own rail network. DW reported that Ukrainian railway company Ukrzaliznytsia documented Russia targeting bridges, rail yards, and trains as recently as that same March 12th period. Putin's strategy is to choke Ukraine's logistics just as Ukraine is trying to choke his. But here's the difference. Ukraine has been more precise, more consistent, and demonstrably more effective at this game. And the fuel train burning in Luhansk that day was proof that Ukraine can hit Russia's arteries just as hard as Russia is trying to hit Ukraine's. Now, here's where things get really interesting, because Ukraine didn't just go after drones and fuel and air defenses in early March. It went after something that goes straight to the heart of Russia's escalating missile strategy. By early 2026, Russia had introduced a new missile into the conflict. It's called the Izdeliye-30, range of about 1,500 kilometers, roughly 932 miles. Warhead payload of approximately 800 kilograms, which is nearly 1,800 pounds of explosive force. And Russia had begun launching these from Su-34 fighter jets operating inside Russian territory, which means the aircraft launching them stay well out of range of Ukrainian air defenses. This is a serious weapon. The kind of weapon that Ukraine absolutely cannot afford to let Russia produce at scale. So on March 10th, Ukraine used Storm Shadow cruise missiles, British-supplied precision long-range weapons, to strike the Kremny-L microelectronics plant in Bryansk, Russia. 7 Storm Shadows hit the main production facility. And from the photos taken after the strike, the facility wasn't damaged. It was devastated. Why Kremny-L? Because that plant is the source of the microelectronic components that go into the Izdeliye-30 missile. Destroy the factory, destroy the production line, and Russia's newest and most dangerous missile stops being produced. At least for as long as it takes Russia to either rebuild the facility or find an alternative source, neither of which is a quick or easy process, particularly under the current sanctions environment. This is the kind of thinking that separates strategic warfare from tactical warfare. Ukraine didn't try to shoot down the Izdeliye-30 after it was already launched. It went upstream and took out the brain of the production process before those missiles could be built and stockpiled. The scale of Russia's missile campaign makes this even more significant. February 2026 saw Russia launch 288 missiles into Ukrainian territory, more than 10 per day, and a level of intensity not seen since 2023. According to Colonel Yuri Inat, head of the communications department of the Ukrainian Air Force, the use of ballistic missiles in particular has increased sharply through the winter of 2025 to 2026, with roughly 18 mass strikes recorded over that period. Russia was clearly doubling down on its aerial bombardment strategy heading into 2026. The Kremny-L strike was Ukraine's answer to that escalation. Go after the source, not the symptom.
Let's step back and look at the full picture that February and March of 2026 are painting for us. Ukraine struck over 105,000 targets in February alone, including 4,000 plus drone pilot positions, surgically removing the human infrastructure behind Russia's most prolific battlefield weapon. It entered March and within the first 12 days destroyed 19 air defense elements, systematically punching holes in the aerial umbrella that Russia uses to protect itself from Ukraine's deep strike campaign. It burned a fuel and lubricants train to deny Russia the ability to power and maintain its frontline equipment. It destroyed an ammunition depot to cut off artillery resupply, and it took out a missile production plant to stop Russia's newest and most dangerous aerial weapon at the source. There's a clear logic running through all of these strikes. Ukraine isn't just trying to inflict casualties or grab headlines, it's working through a very deliberate hierarchy of targets, the things that allow Russia to function as a military force. Drones don't fly without pilots, tanks don't roll without fuel, missiles don't launch without components, Air defenses can't protect anything if they're destroyed, and Russia's ability to recover from all of this is severely compromised by the one factor it can't solve on the battlefield: the sanctions-driven collapse of its defense industrial supply chains. The components it needs to rebuild what Ukraine destroys are getting harder and harder to source. The production timelines are stretching out. The gap between destruction and replacement is widening. That's not a short-term problem for Russia. That's a structural problem. And structural problems in a conflict this long and this attritional have a way of becoming decisive. Here's where we are as of mid-March 2026. Ukraine is hitting harder, hitting deeper, and hitting smarter than at any previous point in this conflict. Russia is absorbing more damage more consistently than its war machine was ever designed to sustain. And the world, distracted by events elsewhere, is largely missing the story. But war news isn't missing it, and neither are you for watching this far, which tells me you actually want to understand what's happening in this war, not just hear the surface level headlines. Now, if you want to know what comes next, what Ukraine's next evolution in long-range strike capability looks like, and why Russia's commanders are privately dreading what's coming, make sure you subscribe to War News right now, because that story is coming, and it's one you don't want to miss. Hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment below telling me which part of today's video surprised you most, and I'll see you in the next one.